Greetings, Earthlings! Cosmos the Alien once again invading your screens, daring to discuss the hypersonic problem, as it's often called, aka why the heck Hypersonic hasn't appeared after Sonic 3 Knuckles introduced him. But specifically, I want to talk about how Sonic Frontiers, the Final Frontiers update, presented a solution to that problem that Shadow Generations has since followed up on, and I haven't really seen a whole lot of discussions on how it has solved that problem. So, before we get into the discussion in earnest, I think it's first important for us to have a bit of a history lesson. So to begin our little history lesson, this starts all the way back in the 90s, the decade that a certain subset of Sonic fans will not shut up about, when the Freedom Fighters were still relevant, and the Sonic and Sega still made consoles. Alas, rest in peace, Dreamcast. I may not care much for many Sega consoles, but the Dreamcast is one that I hold near and dear to my heart. But that's not the subject of today's discussion. So in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, spoiler alert I suppose, Sonic uses the power of the Master Emerald to make the Chaos Emeralds into the Super Emeralds, and then unlocks their power in order to obtain the Hypersonic form. And only in that game uses that to defeat Eggman. And after that game, we never see that form again. I believe that form is also seen in, in the Archie and Fleetway comics. I'm not so sure about Fleetway, but I know it's in Archie, or I think it's in Archie. I'm not so sure. I'm not super duper far into my read through of that. That is going to be a later video. But you also need the Super Emeralds in order to attain the Super Tails, and I think it's called Super Knuckles in the game, but it's called Hyper Knuckles in the Archie comics. But either way, to attain super forms for the other two playable characters in the game. So it was both a reward for linking the two games together, but it was also very much a but it was also, this like cool epic final form. Like it was going from, like, if Supersonic was Super Saiyan, this was Super Saiyan 2. But obviously a lot of fans were like, well, why haven't we seen it since then? This is something, it's bigger, it's better, it's cooler. Hasn't there been a threat in the series that's warranted it showing up again? Well, the big, the usual answer to that from the folks at Sega has been, well, they want to avoid power creep. They don't want to have to keep going bigger and bigger and bigger, which is a problem that a lot of action-oriented series that have, form changes and the like, for instance, Dragon Ball Z, run into. That's why they had to have bigger and bigger threats every arc, and Goku had to keep learning new techniques that were stronger to defeat, the previous enemy, and then eventually Super Saiyan had to be introduced, and that was this new epic form that was, fulfilling a prophecy, and then everyone could do it suddenly, and so he had to go Super Saiyan 2, and then there had to be Super Saiyan 3, and yada, and there were fusions, like they had to keep introducing new stuff. And it just kind of got out of control, because that's kind of what happens. So to keep that under control, Supersonic was just kind of the baseline. Okay, the final boss is either defeated by Sonic on his own, or if it's a really big deal, Supersonic and then maybe Shadow and Silver also going super, depending on the situation. In Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow 05 and Sonic 06 all feature other characters going super alongside Sonic. And then Sonic in the Secret Rings and Black Knight both feature alternative forms instead of Supersonic, which kind of introduced a kind of neat idea of, Sonic can turn into forms that aren't supersonic, but are kind of comparable in terms of the role they play within the context of the game's narrative, and potentially within the lore itself. I believe Archie and Fleetway also similarly had some forms that served that role, but I'm no expert on the lore of those spin-offs. So, but then you get to Sonic Frontiers, which is this, huge kind of restructuring. Ian Flynn at his best, kind of trying to, because Ian Flynn is doing what he does best and kind of trying to fix a bunch of the broken mess that is the Sonic games lore. So he's kind of establishing more of a firm timeline. He's establishing more firm characterization, firm lore, and cleaning up a lot of stuff. And then the developers at Sonic Team were cooking, and for every single boss, you go in, you fight as Super Sonic. And then in the base game, you fight as Super Sonic alongside one of the alongside one of the mechs. It's like, okay, that's kind of interesting, but generally most players found it to be underwhelming. And then the trailer for the final update teased, I believe, or I forget if this was when the game was being teased initially, or if it was when the final update was being teased. But because of the cyber corruption stuff in that game, a lot of fans were wondering if Hypersonic would return. In Final Frontiers, this was actually thankfully not the case. First of all, because I don't like how that form looks. It is very much not good for if you're like me and a bit photosensitive. I don't know what they were thinking. That was kind of how old games were. They were just like, oh, we want to make it so that, players know that something's cool and intense. We're going to just flash lights on the screen all the time because we can't think of anything better, I guess. So instead, in Final Frontiers, you get to the end of the game and you unlock, via controlling the cyber corruption, Sonic unlocks first Super Sonic 2 and then Super Sonic Cyber, which both kind of fulfill the same role as Hypersonic, being this final form unlocked through great difficulty and being a reward for players for going that extra mile. So, and then in Shadow Generations, we have something more akin to what Secret Rings and Black Knight did, where instead of Shadow going super, he has his, I forget what the name is, but he can use his Doom Wings. I think it is just called the Doom Wings, and that acts very similar in terms of the gameplay and the narrative. It acts very similarly to a super form. So, now that we've had our history lesson, I'm sure you're asking, what is the point? What point are you making here, Cosmos? Look, you're rambling. What's the point? I'm glad you asked. My point is that maybe it's best to leave Hypersonic in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. After all, that's a game all about Sonic, arriving at Angel Island for the first time, meeting Knuckles, learning about the Master Emerald, mastering the relationship, the Chaos Emeralds as he learns the relationship between the two for the first time. Eggman trying to use the Master Emerald's powers for evil to power the Death Egg, and then Sonic using the Chaos Emerald souped up by the Master Emerald and using those powers for good, yada yada yada, and the context in which he becomes Hypersonic is very specific. They're powered up into the Super Emeralds by the Master Emerald. So, I don't necessarily think Hypersonic coming back all the time would be great, specifically in Frontiers. I know Ian Flynn wanted to use Hypersonic but was told no, but I think, number one, it's cool to get new things. I like that we have Super Sonic 2 and Super Sonic Cyber. Those are really cool forms, and I'm happy that we got, something new and something cool. But I think it's also neat for fan discussion because, you want to see this form that fans talk about and want to hear, want to see come back in some capacity. Well, go play the game that fans still talk about as one of the best examples of 2D Sonic gameplay and constantly compare new titles to ad nauseum. Perhaps compare to a bit too much. But, and then in Sonic, and then in Shadow Generations, Shadow is turning the powers of his biological father against him in order to prove that he is not, that he's defining himself, that he's not who others define him to be, like that kind of, but also that he is choosing to, he's choosing the difficult decision of leaving his past behind him. He's choosing to not, travel back in time and try to bring back Maria and Gerald or stop the tragedy that, to a certain extent, still haunts him and still causes him pain. But I think it would be a lot cooler if they kept doing what Supersonic 2 and Supersonic Cyber did, where we kept getting new forms that fit whatever the theme and the story of the given game is. I admittedly don't want them to do this every single game, but I think it'd be cool if whenever, instead of doing just hypersonic, if we keep doing this, because it also avoids the power creep issue while also allowing for similar, supersonic and then a step above kind of thing. But darn it, lost my train of thought. What's my train of thought? With the fact that Sonic 06 is turning 20 next year, which I'm certain is crazy for some of you, but I'm sure we could get something like, I don't know, Supersonic Chrono, where he masters the time-traveling powers of the Chaos Emeralds alongside Silver, and gets this new form to, I don't know, something with Iblis or Mephilis or whatever. And they could do something with that. Obviously, I don't think it should be a thing in every game. I think the formula of just regular old Supersonic as the endgame thing is fine, and I think should be the norm, but I think having it be something that rewards players for going the extra mile on the gameplay side of things, like for Sonic 3 and Knuckles, it was getting both games, and then going through all 7 special stages twice over. A total of 14 special stages that were all unique. Which, if it was the half pipe in Sonic 2, goodness gracious. But it was Blue Spheres, and that Blue Spheres is fun. I love Blue Spheres. That is a very, very fun game mode. Whereas in Frontiers, there's a million and one challenges. You have to do a completely different ending. You have to play as these new playable characters. It's and then there's the I believe the Coco Trials and whatnot. It's been a hot minute. I probably should replay the game. But again, it's a reward for players willing to kind of go a little further, go the extra mile. And then you get this cool new ending, separate from the original ending, and you get to see Sonic adopt these cool new forms. And, you get to see something a little more thematically interesting compared to just, same old, but also mech. Now you get to see him be shot out of a cannon in a new form. So, pretty cool. But that's all I got to say. So, thank you all for joining me. This is Cosmos the Alien, blasting off.